Okay, let's jump right into this explainer and decode some ancient secrets from mastering a restless mind. We're going to be exploring this through some incredibly practical, timeless metaphors. Seriously, we'll be looking at some profound wisdom from ancient Indian texts, and you'll be surprised by just how relevant they are to our everyday modern struggles with focus, anxiety, and distraction.
So, I want to hit you with a pretty powerful question right out of the gate. Is your mind under your control, or are you its slave? The source text compares an uncontrolled, unstable mind to an unbridled horse. Think about that for a second. Without reins, a wild horse is just going to drag us wherever it wants, right? It pulls us into bad habits and endless compulsions, like, say, doom scrolling on your phone at 2 in the morning, and it comes with some terrible consequences. An unchecked mind can literally make the daily struggles of life feel so incredibly bitter that existence itself starts to feel like a heavy burden.
There's a really stark contrast here. An unbridled mind leads straight to disease, compulsion, and what the texts describe as a hellish suffering created entirely by our own actions. But on the flip side, a focused mind holds immense power. The text explicitly states that the restraint of the mind is the very thing that elevates a human being to divinity. Any great success you want to achieve, any peak concentration you need, relies absolutely on this exact type of mental control.
The ancient sage Maharshi Patanjali completely hit the nail on the head regarding this challenge. He defined the great act of yoga not as those physical poses or stretches we usually think of today. Instead, he stated that the absolute cessation of mental fluctuations, basically, mastering and stilling the mind's erratic, jumping movements, is the true, pure essence of yoga.
Now you're probably sitting there thinking, well, that sounds amazing, but it feels completely impossible. And hey, if so, you are in great company. How do you control something as restless as the wind? The texts actually validate your struggle by bringing up the great warrior Arjuna's famous dilemma from the Bhagavad Gita. He literally admits to Lord Krishna that trying to catch and tame his wandering mind feels just as impossible as trying to catch the wind in his bare hands.
The ancient texts explain that, much like nature's most valuable gems demand a hard, exhaustive search, taming the mind is deeply challenging. Finding a rare diamond takes immense effort, deep digging, and a whole lot of patience. Mind control is no different, really. It requires profound effort precisely because its value to your life is just immeasurably high.
So what's the actual fix? Lord Krishna gives Arjuna an infallible 2-word remedy that serves as the ultimate cure for a restless mind. Practice, which is known as abhyas, and detachment, known as vairagya. You can think of these two components like the 2 wheels of a cart. They absolutely must work together perfectly if you want to conquer a restless mind.
But to really get this, we have to understand what the mind actually is. The texts emphasize that the mind has no independent power or immortal existence on its own. It's really just a collection of sensory impulses that are entirely directed by the soul. Think about it. How does someone who is a known thief suddenly transform into a saint? It happens because their soul pulled the mind away from one set of actions and directed it toward another. The mind is simply a tool. It goes exactly where we point it.
All right, let's move into Section 1, the mechanics of control, practice, and detachment. These aren't just abstract spiritual ideas, by the way. These are the actual, practical mechanics of stopping your racing thoughts.
Picture a heavy potter's wheel spinning at top speed. You can't just jam your hands down on it to force it to stop instantly, right? You'd hurt yourself. First, you have to practice vairagya. You literally have to stop kicking the wheel to add momentum. Only after you stop spinning it can you effectively apply the friction of abhyas, or practice, using your hands to slowly, safely bring it to a halt. Or, to put it in a more modern context, think about flying down a steep hill on a bicycle. If you want to stop, what is the absolute first thing you must do? You have to stop pedaling. That is detachment. If you are furiously pedaling while simultaneously slamming on the brakes, which represents your practice, your brakes are never going to work, and you're just going to crash. You have to stop the forward momentum first.
Which brings us to Section 2, Myth versus Reality, the true meaning of detachment. This concept actually suffers from a massive modern misconception. When we hear the word detachment, we usually imagine something negative, cold, or totally empty.
The biggest myth out there is that detachment means becoming a socially dead zombie, totally indifferent to the world, just surviving and breathing like a lazy python digesting a massive meal. But the ancient texts actually condemn this kind of apathetic, rootless state as a sin.
The reality is that true detachment is a profoundly active process. It means actively and intentionally cutting off the sensory addictions that are harming us.
The Gita gets highly specific about exactly what we need to detach from. It says true detachment is strictly from sensory pleasures and ego. It's very targeted. You don't detach from your duties or your family or your passions. You strictly turn away from the sensory obsessions that distract you and the human arrogance that blinds you.
So, let's lay out the mind's ultimate enemies as outlined in these teachings: sensory pleasures, ego, lust, and anger. The texts give a stern warning that without dodging the snapping jaws of lust, anger, and ego, successfully crossing the ocean of life is completely impossible. These four forces are exactly what keep your mental bicycle pedaling at top speed.
The texts use some pretty wild imagery here. They call sensory pleasure a sweet knife, an intoxicating high that ultimately just lulls you into a state of delusion. Ego, on the other hand, is described as a sharp axe, acting like a literal poison that induces demonic pride, arrogance, and turns us into monsters. Both are incredibly dangerous, just in very different ways.
And look, we all try to bargain with our minds, right? We think that if we just give in to these sensory desires a little bit, they'll finally go away and we'll have peace. But indulging in sensory desires is like pouring rocket fuel on a raging fire. Trying to satisfy the senses never, ever brings peace. It only makes the fire of desire burn more violently, turning us completely blind to our actual goals and duties.
Trying to rein in your mind without first practicing detachment is literally like throwing tiny pebbles at a speeding car to try and stop it. It's totally useless. Or it's like trying to build a tiny mud dam to hold back a raging river. You simply cannot stop the chaos with superficial actions. To be effective, you absolutely must cut off the river's flow at its very source.
Which brings us to the ultimate question you really need to ask yourself today. What is the true source of your restless thoughts? And are you ready to finally stop pedaling? Identify the momentum you're adding to your own mind, apply these ancient breaks to your modern life, and take back control. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I genuinely hope this leaves you ready to go out and master your own mind.